Hey, welcome everybody. We're going to get started in just a moment. Just going to make sure that YouTube is live and that we've got all of you here in the Zoom room that want to be here. Okay, welcome back to the Friday webinar, everyone. It's nice to be here today to do one of these repertoire sessions. I look forward to these whenever they come up, and I realize it feels like it's been a couple of months or at least 6 weeks since we finished off looking at grade 4. And since then, we've just had grade 5 coming out here in the next few days. And I'm going to call upon our publisher, Andrew Harbridge, in a moment to come on and just say a few words. This is what the grade 5 book looks like. I just got the hard copy. This is just approved a couple of days ago. And my plan today is to play through the group 1 repertoire. So thanks for joining me here. And for those of you that are hanging out in Canada and wondering about election kind of stuff and navigating that whole thing, or if the Stanley Cup playoffs have invaded your home in a negative way for you, this is a little refuge we like to create here for us today. We're going to look at Baroque and classical music. We can put all the world's cares behind, step back into history a little bit. I call this museum music with my students sometimes. It's getting to be a harder sell, or has been for a number of years. But I find that students, even if they are interested more in contemporary music, which we'll look at in 2 weeks' time in this book, they always want to come back to this stuff at some. There's something calming about these sonatinas. And with our grade 5 book from the New Millennium series that I'm sure most of you are familiar with or have been using for a number of years, as I have, I found that book in the classical period especially just a little bit weak. I was never fully happy with the sonatinas and things in there. And this book, I think we've corrected that. There's so many neat forms here to look at and to admire, and tuneful melodies. A lot of them, I think some of them you're going to find familiar. You've seen them before somewhere in other conservatory books, perhaps. We've dug into the past, into the Western Ontario Conservatory Music Book, the old Western Board books from the 1960s and 70s, and brought back a few of those gems, the ones that we felt would fit into here. And so I'm happy to play through them. I think there's 17 pieces or so, many different composers. We've got a few pieces for sure that you probably have never seen before. I know they were new to me, and I'm excited to unveil those. And I'm in some ways even more excited in 2 weeks' time on Friday, May 9th, to read through book 2 or group 2 pieces. The Romantic and Modern are just absolutely amazing, I think, in this book. And so I think for me in my studio, it'll be a significant upgrade to grade 5. We know that grade 5 is an important grade for students because we see our exam numbers, students come in at that entry level at grade 1, and the exams kind of drop off in number for grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. And we always see a bump up at the grade 5. It's an important milestone still for a lot of students. And then we see another bump up in grade 8. And so we hope that this meets your needs. So, before we start and dig into the repertoire, I just want to bring Andrew Harbridge on. He's here in the audience just to give us a little update from our publisher's point of view. And the main thing I'd like to point out is that the name change. They finally settled on a name here, I think. He'll tell us about that, and I'll ask him about it as well. So, Andrew, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead. What kind of update do you have for us in terms of the Mosaics books and anything else that you're publishing and working on right now?
Okay. Well, we're thrilled to have the Mosaics 5 book in print, and it's a very large book. So we're looking at other options for binding. I'm curious how many would pay a little more for spiral bound. And we're looking at glue bound as well. And we'd like to keep the paper weight the same. So if you have any opinions on that and you're in the watching right now, please fire that off to me. It may sway our decision a little bit.
That would be good to hear from people because there are options there. I think the first question that comes to my mind, if we went to a coil binding, as we did with the New Millennium series, and as we did with, even when we moved over to Hal Leonard, anything over 96 pages, they would spiral bind for us. And they would always charge a hefty fee. Do you have any idea what that fee would be to have these spiral bound at the publisher?
It's at least $5 per copy.
On the retail cost?
On our cost.
So that would add to the retail price.
Yeah, that's right. So we wouldn't be looking to profit off of that, but that's about what it is. A lot of it has to be done by hand. There is a machine that will do it, but it's not reliable, and you almost might as well just do it by hand. We do have the machine, but it's a nuisance to do that.
Yeah.
I might mention this book is coming down the line. This is a Brock chart. I played through this book this week. Every piece is worth learning. It's not available yet, but very, very shortly. So we'll run off probably 100. And he has live band.
What's the name of that book? Sorry, we don't have your webcam today. What is the name of that book?
Oh, you don't can't see me?
No.
Okay. Well, it's called Five Finger Jazz. And
Right. I've got that book here. He did go over that briefly for us in the webinar he did last year, and I'm going to have him back to talk about something else he's done. But yeah, it neat stuff, isn't it?
yeah, I'm just very impressed with all the pieces in it.
Yeah.
Young people will just love it.
Okay. Well, we'll look for that on your website shortly, or is it already there on your website?
Not yet. We've been putting all our energy into getting the Mosaics books out.
Yeah.
Brock does have pieces in the Millennium, or sorry, in the Mosaic series.
Yeah, we've included a couple, and we have a couple more to come. I know one I'm sort of tagging for level 7, and he's writing more all the time. Really neat stuff. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but yeah, thanks for mentioning that as well.
Yeah, no problem.
And then the website. How do people get to the website now? What's the URL? Or I'm sure a number of URLs will funnel people there, but what's the best way to get to the website to order books?
If you go Harbridge and Wanless Music, that will get you there. And it should be Harbridge and Wanless .com.
Right. Harbridgeandwanless.com. If anyone needs that link, I actually put that one in the last email that went out yesterday, I believe. So you'll see that link from time to time there. If any of you are near Long and McQuaid, any of their 100 stores nationwide, we also support, Andrew supplies them as well, and they have all these books in stock, or will have 5 soon. And then maybe I'll just mention anyone that's in the lower mainland BC or in the Kelowna area, I'm going to do a couple of workshops in June on Mosaics, one at their flagship store downtown Vancouver on Terminal Avenue. That'll be Tuesday, June 17th in the morning, starting at 9:30 a.m. Those of you in that area, we'll be targeting you with emails just to let you know in case you want to come out and see the show live. I'm going to go through a survey right from prep all the way, a little bit sneak preview to grade 7 and 8, even in that workshop. And you'll be able to get a special deal on the books there from Long and McQuaid. So we thank them for doing that. And then in Kelowna, I'll be there a few days later, I believe on the Friday of that week, 17th and 20th, Friday, June 20th. If anyone's in the Okanagan and wants to come and check out a session there, I'll be hitting your email address with how to get in touch there and find that session.
Yeah, and we're working flat out to get that level 6 ready for you.
Yeah, that is great. Nice. We could have that by June 1st. We have grade 6 ready. That's our timeline, folks. And then from there, grade 7 and 8 we'll be working on over the summer. I imagine grade 8 probably will take till the fall. It's a huge project. We're already working on the music selection for those, and you can expect that for the fall, I would think. So I think without further ado, Andrew, thanks for the update. Handy and nice to always have you here to chat.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Everyone, check out harbridgewanlessmusic.com, harbridgeandwanlessmusic.com.
That's right.
And we've got just a ton of other supplementary stuff too that we feature from time to time. And at some point we'll have, once Mosaics is out of the way, we'll have them back just to show us everything else in the catalog that we may not be aware of, including the theory, etc. Okay, so now with the task at hand here, one other thing I know I haven't mentioned for a while, but I did talk about it briefly. I'm going to share my screen and bring up the document for you to follow along. I'm going to have a screen share second so you can watch along. Zoom's changed things a little bit, so it takes me a little bit longer to navigate through these things. So here is the Mosaics 5 book. So you can follow along. There's our committee members there. About the Mosaics collection, notes on editing. If you missed the workshop, the webinar that Andrew and George Lidhurst did 2 weeks ago, you can see that on our YouTube channel at CCTV. They went and gave us a behind-the-scenes look at some of the interesting things that come up during the editing process, and specifically where to source and how we go about sourcing the original sources. Sometimes we have ideas of music that we've seen in print somewhere. We want to find the original source, and we realize it wasn't a keyboard piece. It was actually a transcription from an orchestral thing, or any number of things it could have come from, or a song. And so we don't use those. We're trying to favor just keyboard music. So those are some of the things that come up. And here we talk about some of the notes on editing, the digital SuperScore version. But one thing I think it's time to remind people of, because we did this back in grade 1, and I did a webinar a number of months ago now, I guess, when we launched grade 1 back in the fall. The idea about how the conservatory grading system is set up and is evolving, we're trying to keep it from evolving. The only thing we're doing to evolve the conservatory grading, and we talk about specifically the leveling system, is to include more contemporary music along the way so that students can play music that's more relevant to their social experience. And we drag them into the baroque and classical music as we can. Some students want to live in that world, and that's wonderful. It's a great way to learn. But that's one way we're making it evolve. But in terms of the actual level, we know there are some deviations out there now where it seems like sometimes the levels are getting perhaps a little bit easier. We're resisting that temptation. And so you'll see our lists, which used to be very comparable to other conservatories, our lists are more or less staying the same. So you have to be careful if you're using books from other conservatories, check our list to make sure the leveling of each piece is correct. It's better to follow ours when you're using our exams, of course. And so we talked before about how to set students up for grade 1, and I talked about my system in particular, just because that's what I'm familiar with, and how it takes a number of years to get students ready to be an honest grade 1, and how I like to get students to learn 2 dozen or 30 pieces at the grade 1 level before considering an exam or before moving on to grade 2. And once they're set up in that way, then these levels make sense. Otherwise, by the time you get to grade 5, we see a lot of students really struggling because they've been taught to the exam where they only have to learn 6 or 8 pieces a year. And it's just not enough. You can force students, you can spoon feed them in a way that'll get it, but they don't really have the reading skill. They're missing all sorts of background. They're not familiar with articulation, dynamics, performance experience. And so we encourage students to learn the majority of pieces in a book or at that level, regardless of where you get the repertoire from these days. It's nice to learn 20 pieces or 2 dozen pieces at those early grades all the way up to grade 5. And for my students in grade 5, I used to get them to learn still about 18, 20 pieces. Nowadays, I've backed that off a little bit, I think 14 to 16, and I'll move them on to grade 6 if they feel ready. And my sort of guideline is if they can sit down at grade 5, which we're going to look at today, and learn a piece by reading through it more or less on their own. I'll show them some difficult things and some technical things to watch out for, of course. But if they can learn that in a week or 2 on their own, then I know they're getting ready to move up to level 6. Otherwise, level 6 is just going to be that much more of a jump. And so from time to time, we see students' marks in a range, and then all of a sudden they drop off because they just simply don't have that background. So watch for that. For us, it's not always 1 year per grade. Sometimes, I often have students, especially coming from other teachers, transfer students, where that, grade 5 may last a couple of years, and grade 6 may last a couple of years. And then it evens out, and all of a sudden grade 7, they can cruise through, and grade 8, they can handle really well, and everything kind of moves smoothly from there once they have that background. So that's a little bit about what we try to say in this forward here. Table of contents, we're going to play through group 1 today. Everything from Zipoli to Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre. And group 2, I'm going to do next week. Just have a quick look at those composers there. I'm so excited to share that with you as well in 2 weeks' time on Friday, May 9th. There's been a link in your email inbox yesterday to sign up, and some of you I've noticed have already signed up for that one. But I'll throw that again at you next week or the week after so that you can sign up for that one if you want to see live and ask questions. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as I go. I'm going to be altering my mic as I go here because when I'm talking, Zoom is so different from when I'm playing. Of course, nowadays we realize that if we're hearing the exam, and most of the time examiners have to stop in an online exam and set up the audio settings with students. I'm going to go over those settings again later on in May for you in a webinar so that we can understand. It's just got to the point where Zoom, without original sound enabled in Zoom, we just can't hear the piano, period, let alone maybe a voice sometimes. But we have to learn to open up that mic. And so I'll be changing my levels constantly here between talking and playing so that you can hear me clearly. And we're going to start today with this verso, a liturgical keyboard piece from this sonata by Domenico Zipoli. And in this one, I find it interesting. It's a really good example of invertible counterpoint. We have 2 linear lines here in baroque counterpoint. And the idea is that it's invertible. You could flip the 2 parts and it would still sound good. I mean, it sounds a little odd to our ears, but it would still harmonize very well. And so in this kind of music on the keyboard, as it would have been for the harpsichord originally, or in this case, maybe even the organ, it says there, the cembalo, we want to hear both parts fairly equal. We don't want a right hand that's dominating and a left hand that's kind of subservient. I'm going to try and battle it out a little bit. And some of you have heard me say this before. I try and let the left hand and the right hand compete a little bit. So that by the time we're getting down to the 4th line there, the right hand has some nice zigzag 16th notes, and I want the left hand's 16th notes following to be just as loud, and that's hard to do in the middle range of the piano and the keyboard. So that's one thing that I really watch out for carefully here in this piece. So I'm going to get right to it here. I've got an overhead view of my keyboard for those that want to see that. It's just a partial view, and that should be smaller on your screen, I would think, because I'm screen sharing. But it's going to enable original sound, so you won't hear me speaking as clearly now from this point, but I will try my best to be heard. We've got original sound, and throw in the chat box if you're not hearing this clearly. Feel free to throw that in the chat box so I can see that something's wrong. Also a little bit of flexibility in the line, letting it rise and fall, always trying to shape and taper things, trying to create interest. It's a really flamboyant period, the Baroque, and so I'm trying to be as decorative as possible, but without creating too thick of a sound. It's got to be, it's got to be transparent is the word I'm looking for there. As I'm going through, you can hear when I want the left hand to come out towards the end, a lot of the work I'm doing is hiding the right hand. On the harpsichord, this stuff all just works. The texture pops out perfectly. On the piano, we're constantly adjusting for that, and that's something that I really focus on with students at this level. The dynamics there are editorial. You don't have to follow those. You can see a lot of time I'm not following them, but they are very strong suggestions, so you certainly can't go wrong by using those suggestions there. Okay, I am loud and clear. That's good to hear. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, and 1 second here. Just gonna do some control here. Second piece, Allegretto. It's an Allegretto that we found in the old Western Ontario Conservatory book back from the 80s, early 90s, by J.C.F. Bach, one of Bach's sons. And at the time that J.S. Bach, the father, was writing music in Baroque style, all of his sons had sort of converted over, writing in the new style from the 1720s roughly onward, in this new classical style where we have these Alberti-based patterns and other neat little features, articulations that we've talked about on some of the other webinars. In this one in particular, I find the idea of finding an Allegretto tempo within a 2/4 time frame a bit tricky, and most students are probably going to play this a bit slower because of the technical things involved, where to the trained ear it would sound like 4/4. So to me today, I'm going to try and capture 2/4, Allegretto, which is not as quick as Allegro, and there's something light about it. And then I'm also fussing about these turns. You'll see partway down the first page there. I guess that's measure 23, no, 13. Measure 13, 14, I'll talk about those after and how to handle those with students. So here's the first page. I'll keep the first page up there. The second page is much the same, but I'll play through the whole thing. Lots of tricky finger work in there. And again, when it comes to those turns, because there's enough room, I start on the principal note, turn above and below and come back to because there's enough time there. Sometimes you'll see in classical music there's a turn written, but there isn't enough time. And so instead of starting on the main note, you would start on the note above it and do a shortened turn. And that has a different symbol sometimes depending on the publisher and what the composer's indicated. But that's one way I do that, and that's tricky for students. I get them to play, first of all, the main rhythm without the turn. Because a lot of them will put the turn in correctly, but they won't honor the dotted rhythm. Or they'll rush it, or they'll and distort the rhythm or the pulse. So it's tricky for them to time that. So a lot of playing without the turn, and then adding the turn in, trying to hear. And I may play an octave or probably 2 octaves higher with them at the same time to play that main rhythm, while they add the turn inside. Something else that happens too is when they finish the turn and complete it back to the principal note, I'm noting that that is on the 2nd eighth of that beat. And if they time that, that's another way to sort of anchor and get their ear to pay attention, because it's something they can relate in those inner 16ths or the inner part of the beat. So that's one little trick I would use with Allegretto in this book. Next piece has the title of Air, and this is Jeremiah Clark. And the air is an interesting thing. It used to be more just a song you hear in Renaissance music or early Baroque. And then after a while in Britain, this a collection of airs by Clark, the air had taken on a different, more dance-like quality. It was no longer just a song, but just a simple dance. And this is one we pulled out of an old Western board book, I believe, a long time ago. I had never heard this piece before, but I just love it. It dances, it's got everything Baroque in it, it's not too hard. And there's lots of articulation that we've talked about before where the fast notes can be joined and the longer note values will be detached. And you'll hear me doing that especially in the left hand. Some fancy trills at the cadences. I'll keep the repeats out of this to keep it short, but this will give you an idea how this goes. Very dancey, very excitable. I think students will really like this one. It reminds me a lot of the Entrada in some ways that we had in the New Millennium Series Grade 5 book. In this one, nothing too complicated. The trills there, we notate specific fingerings. If you see a 3-2, 3-2 above the trill, that means start on the note above generally. You don't have to follow that. That's just a suggestion. You can certainly shorten that for students that aren't playing, that don't have as quick of fingers or have trouble fitting in the 4th note of the trill. 3 notes is enough, and you could start on the principal note for that. And so there's different ways to do it. We're trying to indicate, the most scholarly way to do it, but it's not necessary on an exam even at this level, as long as they're attempting trills. I think it's important. Passe-pied. A number of passe-pieds come up in the Mosaics series. I have a feeling we've had one almost every grade aside from grade 1. This one by Charles Dupart. And the passe-pied has an interesting evolution. From the Baroque period, late Baroque opera perhaps, it was sort of similar to a minuet, and then as time went on, it sort of had a more pastoral kind of sense to it, thinking of shepherds. And so moderato, grazioso. I find it hard to kind of hold back in this one. I always played this one too fast in the past when I've heard it. And I'm trying to highlight in the left hand the articulation where you have a long bass note and beats 2 and 3 are over top of that sustained bass note. And so what I'm trying to do is differentiate in my articulation there where I'm sustaining the bass note and beats 2 and 3 I'm going to pluck. I'm going to play them detached so that we hear a little bit of counterpoint within the left hand itself. That's difficult for grade 5, but I've taught it that way for a long time and it seems to work. I'll add those little trills in there, those little 3-note trills. Most of them have the upper note preceding it, and so we don't replay the upper note in this style. And you can see the fingering will reflect that. You'll also hear a little bit, I'm trying to have a bit of flexibility in the line, especially when it's moderato. I'm not trying to just barrel through it, but have a little bit of push and pull. It's not outright rubato like we would hear in romantic music, but a harpsichord player playing this would certainly, that would be their main sort of artistic device they would use to express in this case, and I like carrying that over to the piano. The other thing that's difficult too is sometimes just managing which notes in the left hand are sustained and which ones are plucked. That's the main thing I find in this one that students have a hard time with. Okay, questions here. Jono. In the CPE Bach piece, it seemed like when you give the performance, you performed the turns as a 30-second note triplet on the second 16th of the beat of the dotted eighth. But when you were discussing it afterwards, it sounded like you played it more 4 equal 30-second notes starting on beat. Is it either? Did I mishear? No, I don't think you're mishearing, and thanks for pointing that out. I demonstrated it differently for those students that would want to line it up perfectly. Sometimes we're told, I know in performance practice, that trills in the Baroque period shouldn't be measured. They're just free and they're just fitting into the decorative line, right? And so I'm going to play it differently. When I was describing it after, I was describing how I would have to break it down for that mathematically inclined student who would be better off lining it up as something. So I'm glad you caught that. Yeah, the WCF Bach piece, the Allegretto and F major. That's your answer to that. I hope that answers my question, or answers your thought or question there. Good ear. And if anyone has any questions like that, let me know. It's great to have a discussion as we go through these here. Okay, sonatina, one of the first of many sonatinas or sonatina-like movements. This one I don't think fits into a sonata form, and we're not sure which movement, if this was a multi-movement sonatina, but I've got it labeled in my own mind just as a simple ABA form, where you get A, and then when B comes in starting at bar 9, it's sort of B, and then B2, it has a variation on B. And then back to a simple restatement of A, but with this crazy Alberti bass pattern that will throw kids off, or throw students off. And so I even have a hard time. I get to measure 25, and so I've got to really hustle to keep up with the tempo that I've set, especially if I want to keep this in 2/4. It's another 2/4 Allegretto thing where I know myself I need to hold back a little bit to make sure I don't get going too fast, so when I get to the Alberti pace pattern, I still survive. That's the main challenge I find in this one. And then also trying to just, thinking dynamics I find difficult in this one too. Let's get, make sure we have light and dark in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to mostly follow what's on the page in terms of dynamics, not entirely, but pretty close, I think. So I hope you enjoy this. I'll leave the first page up so that you can read through the main part of the form here. I'm happy with how that turned out. Probably the slowest I've ever played it, honestly. I usually find I have to work pretty hard towards the end. So that's a nice one of the first sonatinas here. Lots of A major actually in this book, which is perfect for grade 5. I think it fits the hand well. Okay, a quirky Haydn piece, this divertimento. I'm sure most of you have probably seen this before. It's a really great sort of pedagogical tool to get students to really understand rhythm. I wouldn't give this piece to every student. They have to understand rhythm. The phrasing is odd because at this time period Haydn's using lots of 2.5 to 3 bar phrases kind of sandwiched together. Like eating a sandwich with just random things around the kitchen that, you're just using leftovers. And so he patches these leftovers together and we get some kind of form, a little ABA form out of it. But almost meant to sound improvised, I think. That's what I sort of think. It's like Bach sitting down in the morning at the organ and just improvising a prelude or something like that. Divertimento, lots of little fragments. And so really good idea of the pre-classic style. But listen for just the odd phrasing. I've had to play this a lot, and it's really getting in my ear now because I haven't taught this one very much. So I'm getting happier with it. Lots of decorations, fitting in these little triplets, which are almost like ornaments in a way if you played it at a faster speed. I'm going to hold back a little bit to make sure I get the timing right because it is very tricky. But listen to the unpredictable nature and humor that's supposed to come out in Haydn's music through these irregular phrases. So if you're scrutinizing really closely, watching the score and listening back on replay or something, you'll see sometimes the trills I'm not doing exactly as they are, just adapted into another way that I like to decorate. Perfectly acceptable, okay, especially on exams. So that's the quirky divertimento. Savoyard. Elizabeth Turner. This is a piece I've been excited to include in grade 5 for a long time, ever since I first heard it. It was Cecile de Rosier did a webinar a couple, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, when she was starting to unearth some of this music by women composers, and she played this, and I always thought I would love to teach it, and I was so happy when we could find a source and include this. So Savoyard, I've done a bit of research. It's really hard to understand where the title comes from, because Savoyard was a faction of King Henry III's court back in the 1200s, and a faction that was, spreading through France and Germany. It's also or France and Italy rather. It's also a region, the Savoy region in France. You could refer to that. But to me, there's something about the Savoyard. There's something military-like about it, even though it's in 3/4 time, sort of military march-like. And this is a really good exercise, I think, for grade 5 students in hearing inner voices, understanding and getting to play in chords. We don't get to do this often enough, I think. And just wonderful to have Elizabeth Turner represented here with this piece. So again, in A major, I'm listening for inner voices. I'll work with students sometimes, getting them to play and sing the inner voices as they're playing, and it really strengthens finger independence and getting to hear that independence. This is just one page. I think students would struggle with that last line where you get this back and forth rhythm that comes up in this kind of music from time to time. I would get them to play it solid. Before breaking it up. Sorry about the audio, I know that's loud when I play that when I'm at my talking volume. And really the left hand should control the pulse, but the right hand has to inflect. Left hand controls the pulse, right hand has to inflect to create a sense of line. So always tapering to try and show long lines and textures like that's difficult without getting it too percussive or too heavy, too back and forth. This one is very difficult for students. I'm using a lot of pedal, not a lot of pedal that you can hear, but little pedal shots in the background to add color. I've recently slowed this down. I used to play it quite a bit faster. I was playing it on my harpsichord on the digital piano, and I got used to that for a while where it can go a bit quicker. But then really for an andante, it needs to that just a little bit more relaxed tempo. So I'm experimenting with that. still trying to play it with a lifted feel in the articulation. And so I'm adding dabs of pedal in there to grab some color and sustain those notes just a little bit as I go, so that the sound doesn't get too brittle as I slow it down. So those are some of the considerations that I think would work well with students in this one. Siciliana, George and Andrew mentioned this in their webinar a couple of weeks ago. The original, or publishers later added the title Little Shepherd Boy. You'll often see it published with that title. And at the beginning, Cantabile Espressivo, that's in brackets, so we don't know really what was there, but I think it's, you know, what the indication would be. There probably was no indication. But it is clearly a song, I think. And in my mind, 6/8 is usually something a little more swingy, a little quicker, unless we look at singers. When composers are writing for the voice, even in this time period, they're often using 6/8 to indicate pastoral scenes, things that are lilting on. And so I think the tempo indication is right on. Something that's not your typical 6/8. It's going to feel more like 3/4, but it's an indication, I think, that is more adapted to the vocalist here. And so that's what I'm going to try and portray here. Elaine's elaborating. This is great. Thanks, Elaine. I'm going to read this out for everybody. In the Landon et al. Edition of the Haydn, that's the divertimento we're going back to. The grace notes in bars 6 and 8 is written without a crossbeam. Interesting. Accordingly, you teach the performance of these as eighth notes, and for exam purpose, this performance practice would be accepted. Absolutely. So just coming back to that, absolutely. There's so many different editions, and that's why even you can hear in my performance, I'm not matching sometimes what's there. And so that's a really neat thing. We'll look back at that. Grace notes in bars 6 and 8 written without a crossbeam. Okay, thanks for that, Elaine. And yeah, the main takeaway from that comment is, examiners are trained to listen for these things and enjoy them, not to be critical of them. Okay, Siciliana, otherwise known as Little Shepherd Boy, by Samuel Arnold. Inflecting, trying to create some line. Sorry for the volume there. I think the volume was probably up a little too loud on that one. I didn't get it. I had my volume. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew, for the comment. Yeah, I realized that when I looked at my volume. I had it backwards here. Sorry, folks. In this one, you get these double third. You get these little designs just before the beat, and towards the end, they go into double thirds. Where is that? Sorry. I'm going to give you the bar number so you can see there. Bar 13, 14, bar 14. That's going to be really tough for you on the student. It's tough for me, and I'm not convinced I'm actually playing all those. Well, right at the very beginning, even in bar 2. So what I'm trying to show students there, nice loose arm, and the arm controls that gesture almost like a bow and a violin. A lot of movement so that I can just roll all of those together. But it's not like that. It has to be in thirds. One gesture for all three results is what I want to sort of teach there. It's interesting, the iPhone can slow these down. You can do slow-mo, and sometimes I'll record students in slow-mo so we can see exactly what they're doing. I'd like to do that for myself so that I can see what I'm doing. So I'm not hearing it as clearly as I want to. So that's a Siciliana, Samuel Arnold. And now we go on to another one of these A major sonatas in 2/4 time. This one by Samuel Wesley. What do I have for form here? This is I'm casting this in a rondo form. Sorry, we don't see a lot of sonata form because we're seeing a lot of second movements, and the second movement often wasn't in sonata allegro form. But here we get it in rondo form. A, B, with a da capo from the second page back to the beginning. So here's the B section, so you can see it. I'm going to have this fortissimo moment in the center, the sort of the centerpiece of the whole movement. And I'm going to give it special treatment just so we understand where the structure is, winding down in that last line marked lentendo, which is just slowing down, and then back to the beginning to fine. So I'll try and play through the whole movement here, and we'll see how this holds together. So very classical, very typical, light, transparent textures, some dynamic contrasts. Here's a look at that second page again. You can see some really fun runs for students to do, adding that D sharp going to the dominant key, as you would expect in a sonata movement. Okay. Oh yeah, okay, Elaine's saying here back in this time period, I'm assuming the grace notes would be played as 16ths. Or no, maybe you're referring to the Haydn still, I think. Okay. Now, Andante. Bertini. So again, another sonatina type movement, but it's just in a ternary form. It's not really from a sonata or a sonatina. This one's kind of neat because it goes from A major to A minor in the middle, and it's a clear ternary ABA form. Lots of lyricism here, 4/4 time. So again, I'm just going to try and inflect. A lot of inflection, fewer shorter notes and more legato treatment for this one. That could certainly be slower for an andante, in fact, than that. But you know, this one keeps the tempo moving and makes it a little easier to produce longer lines at that page, or at that pace rather. Okay, so in the chat box here, you're talking about the Siciliano. I see. The 16th notes that would be easier for students rather than grace notes. That makes sense. Let's look at the second page there of the andante I just played. And then now, okay, this one's probably a little more familiar to most people. Fritz Spindler, famous C major sonata, the second movement of this opus 157, number 4. It's marked schnell, which is quick. Again, 2/4 time, it's nice in C major. We get some hand crossing, some Diabelli-like things happening there. I see this in a rondo form quite clearly, almost identical to Fury Release, let's say, where A, B, A, C, A. A, B comes right away, back to A, and then you get this extended C section, the sort of highlight of the whole movement, and then back to A at the end with a little coda. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm sure you've seen this before. And we have 3 pages here, so maybe what I'll do, I will put the second page up on the screen for you here to follow along so you can see the C section work out. for the volume on that one too, folks. I forgot to turn down. I'm sure you're familiar with it. There's a little timpani section at the end here in the bottom line. Just lots of rotation. I'll just flip to the third page. Lots of rotation and accenting the bottom note and trying to keep the thumb really loose. Double thirds. We've included a fingering there that I think makes sense rather than students hopping along with the same finger 2 and 4, 1 or 3, which keep things kind of stiff. We want to be able to crescendo through that. I almost want to play it again for you because I left the volume up on that, but I think you get the idea. And I'm not sure how much more my nervous system's going to handle, to be honest. It's Friday. Sorry for wrong notes and things like that along the way here. I'm trying to keep track as best I can. It's a lot to put this all together. So, minuet in G major, Telemann. We're going back to the Baroque period here. And you'll notice in the books that we do scatter these around a bit. It's not all just Baroque music at the beginning, classical music towards the end of Group 1. We do lump them all together. These style periods, they did coexist simultaneously for quite a while, especially through the 1720s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And so we just mix them all up there. And again, on exams at this level, students can just choose anything from grade 1. They don't have to choose Baroque music, but we try to encourage it, of course, because we're starting in grade 6, we isolate Baroque music in Group 1, and students finally have to include at least one Baroque and one classical piece on their exam. So it's good if students have an idea of the style. This one features in G major a lot of broken chords, and so students are really good at expanding the hand. I've included a fingering there that I think makes sense for young hands, but I'm not actually doing most of them that way either, where I'm tucking my thumb under more often on the page. I'm going to use a larger hand just because I can, but it's a good way to expand students' range at the keyboard without having to go too fast. Hear things at the end too. The mordant, I can never get that mordant in. I always play it as a trill rather than a mordant. Not a big deal. Be nice if it was a mordant, but I've gotten so used to it being a trill, I just think it sounds better. So that's the minuet in G major. I think that's one of our, there's maybe one more Baroque piece at the end. This is Diabelli Sonatine. I'm sure it's familiar to a number of you. This is more of a true sonata form here, I believe. Some tricky moments. Number one, in just understanding that later on we've got triplets in the mix down here at the end of the second page. And so back at the beginning, to start with just quarter notes, I did teach this piece recently, really hard for students to get a grip on what the tempo is at the beginning, to leave room to insert those triplets later. And maybe I'll talk about those triplets at the end and give you a suggestion for how to practice that. I think students find that a really satisfying formula to have that beginning, middle, end, or what we might call, exposition, development, recapitulation throughout the piece there. For those triplets in that left hand towards the end, it's really for students, I think, all about balancing the thumb. And so I get them to accent the thumb, leave out the first two notes, and play from the thumb down. You can see the rotation as well. Getting used to landing on that thumb because that keeps it relaxed. And then when they bring it up, playing it normally, I get them to focus on that top down. Making sure that the arm is supporting the thumb as well, so that you've got rotation, and then you can rotate these things as fast as they want over time as they get used to that. Okay, getting near the end here, we have a Gigue by Scarlatti. This is difficult, 12/8 time. Some really wide leaps, really indicative of sort of the Spanish culture he was immersed in when he wrote all of these sonatas, over 500 or 555, we think we have a catalog of them. There's an acrobatic kind of nature to it. In Spain he'd be seeing acrobats in the streets and things like that, apparently. Jugglers, it's just a wild kind of culture. And all of his keyboard sonatas, most of them are infused with elements of that culture. You can certainly hear that here. The left hand is simple enough, but the focus here and why we put this in grade 5 is because the right hand has to do some really strange leaping around, and it makes it really difficult. Brisk tempo overall. This one reminds me of a tarantella almost in the middle. The way the right hand just keeps running and running in these sort of run-on sentences is kind of a neat thing. I think students might like that challenge. Okay, Romance. This is from a sonatina, Opus 8 number 2 by Marguerite Salome Edelman. Edelman we don't know a lot about. She's one of the women composers that that musicologists are finding her music now in libraries, and we're starting to publish it, and so we're happy to include this because it's something new and fresh. It's thought that her brother, I can't remember his name, but was a famous composer, and that sometimes she would publish music under her name, is what the research is showing. This is a large ABA format here, going from G major to G minor. I won't play the repeat though, I'll only play just a little part of the repeat so we balance it off in our ears, but I won't go back and do the lengthy section A all the way to Fine. So that's going to come out quite distorted. I apologize again. So anyway, that's a fun one. Not too fast. It's neat to go into the minor key and then have students, you get to play Sturm und Drang a little bit here and get to express. So I think that's really important there when you get to the G minor section. Okay, we're getting near the end here, and we've saved this famous sonatina here for last in this section. This is the Kula Opus, or yeah, it was Opus 55 number 1. This is the first movement, so we've got a really nice sonata allegro form here. Let me just check that out. I think most of you will recognize this one. I know it took me a long time before I finally heard it, and then I started to teach it, and I really like it because in the recap, you get a really neat moment there where you get the main theme, and then it switches to a new key that sort of heightens the tension, which is kind of satisfying, I think, for students. They'll love the long-running eighth notes in this one. The left hand's not too hard, which is good. It's not a lot of thick Alberti bass that you have to keep up with, just being written in eighth notes. So I'm going to try and hold the tempo back a little bit. We've got 3 pages here. I think most of you are probably familiar with this, so I'll leave maybe perhaps the second page up for you to view as I'm playing here. Volume down. So a couple neat things occur to me there as I'm reading through. See if I can remember what I was thinking. Oh, the RFs. Rinforzando? I'm not sure. It's like a sforzando in a way. Just want to make sure we grip on those things. And so when you get to the bottom of this first page, for example, you get this cadence group. And I'm always listening to see, okay, where's the dominant? Where's the strong beat? Which one of the 2 note slurs should be accented? Because it's not always the first note accented and then getting lighter. Sometimes it's the reverse. And so where's that? Yeah, okay, so at the bottom of, actually, sorry, let's look back to measure 7. In measure 7, we have, to me, the 2 note slur moves forward because you get the strong beat going forward, but you also get the dominant there. And so to me, there's like this order of operations that you have to judge sometimes. So I think that's a neat thing to try and instill in students' ears. And sometimes the SF and the RF later on indication will help guide us toward that solution. And so at the bottom of the page, this time at that final cadence group at the end of the exposition, I'm accenting the 5 chord, which is actually on an offbeat. So there I have to imagine, but to me the dominant sort of gets the tension and gets the accent to me that trumps which one is the downbeat, perhaps, if that makes any sense. And then later on, that comes up a couple of times, and so you'll hear me sometimes successfully in what I just played, sometimes it didn't quite come out the way I wanted, in terms of where that accent is. Is it on the beat or off the beat? The other thing I'm noticing is the word dolce. You see at the top of this second page here. Dolce without a dynamic marking. Right away, I'm always thinking longer arm, slower hammer speed, to try and get that little bit more space and a little bit more tone out of it, just to change the color in some way. The dolce indication gives us that, maybe even a little stretch in the tempo sometimes in some cases. And you can see dolce here too toward the end in the recap. Piano, crescendo, and then dolce with this high melody there. It's fun to sort of interpret that and feel how that changes things a little bit in the color. Okay, I think this is the last piece here in Group 1. Back to the Baroque period, a minuet that probably none of you have heard before, or close to none of you, by Elisabeth Jacques de la Guerre. This is one that's been published a couple of times now, And we wanted to include it, removing some of the trills. We don't print all of the trills here that would have been included. If you listen to a harpsichord recording of this, where a harpsichord player is doing all the decorating, is really quite fantastic. It has to be slow to get that all in. We just didn't think it would work well with young hands on the piano. And so we took some of the trills out. There's still quite a few there, whether they're mordents or trills. And then we get this double section, which has these long meandering eighth note runs, which are really fantastic for students to try and shape and create lines. And I'm still trying to settle on something I really like, but I played it a number of times, so I'm starting to know what I want there. But it's kind of fun to play with that elasticity. It reminds me a lot of the grade 6 sarabanded variations by Handel that's so famous. And the second variation of that has these long left-hand runs. That's what this one sort of reminds me of. So I hope you enjoy this. Volume. One of the struggles that hit me in the editing process with this one is just how the composer wants to treat the melodic minor. And you can see it's cast in G minor, but you wouldn't get that from the key signature right away because the E flats are coming and going, and so that's the way that the composer notated it. And so most printed editions now follow that convention. And so the key signature doesn't always give you the keys. We have to teach students how to really look. And that E flat, E natural thing is really, I find it really problematic toward the end, where you can see we've included in brackets what could have been errors, we don't know, but if you stick with what the composer has indicated in the original, which you can get by not playing the accidentals that we've included in brackets, you get something a little different, especially toward the finish. And I'm really struggling with the second last bar in the E flat in the left hand. Every time this piece goes 4-5-1, the 4 chord is in C minor with the E flat. And so to play that ending the way the composer has written in the original with an E natural, to me sounds funny, but then it sounds funny both ways. And there are just things where you kind of wonder really what the truth is. On exam, students can do whatever they want, not in terms of changing notes, but if we have it in brackets and they include it, it's okay. And if they have solid reasons for it, that's fine. I myself, I've been told that the research in that second last bar shows that it should be an E natural. I'll just give you how that sounds. I'll play the whole last line. That is that when you play E natural in the second last bar, it's the only time in the piece that it does that. It kind of sounds like it wants to be a tierce Picardy, but it's not, because it's just the 4 chord. So anyway, interesting piece. I've actually had a student want to play this already and is working on it, which is good. I was a little bit skeptical. Beyond that, we get into Bert Mueller and other people that we include in Group 2. We'll do that in 2 weeks' time. This has been really fun to play through this for you here today. I see we're just past the top of the hour, so if those of you who stuck with me here, quite a few of you who are still in the Zoom room, thanks for sticking around. I'm going to stop the live stream, and if anyone has any questions about anything else, anyone that's watching on replay, thanks for doing so, and thanks for checking this out. Please spread this on to to other teachers you know. If you want to buy Mosaics, you know it's been out there for a while. You can order it online or at Long and McQuaid, and we thank you for your support in doing so. And I hope you look forward to the other grades as we do. And again, grade 6 looks like, I would say, beginning of June we want it to be ready, and we're a good halfway through that, I would say. So I'm going to stop